Just imagine the universe of Stan Lee Batman origins. If there is one name that has become synonymous with Marvel and all of its productions since the 1960s, it's Stan Lee. The other half of some of the most seminal superhero creations of the last millennium, including the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, gained a reputation for being a pioneer, not despite the humanity of its stories, but because of them. Lee pioneered the naturalistic approach of building a character, giving all its superheroes fallible qualities that ultimately turned the former Atlas comic into the juggernaut we know as Marvel today. After nearly 40 years of directly leading the charge against his distinguished competition, gotta love that signature Stan Lee branding, Stan the Man announced his retirement from writing for Marvel Comics in the late 90s. This was a shock for comic book fans, but it was nothing in comparison to what would happen in 2001, because that is the year that Stan crossed over to said distinguished competition and created a year-long series reimagining the most popular superhero team of all time with his flavor. The Just Imagine series began publication in September of 2001, and its first issue focused on a DC character that Stan had previously written for, sort of, anyway. In 1989, for the landmark 600th issue of Detective Comics, Stan Lee penned a poem in honor of the Caped Crusader, and a decade later, he got to tell his story in his own manner. Just imagine Stan Lee with John Kubert creating Batman was the first installment of a 13-issue dream run that saw the man reimagine the story of the world's greatest detective alongside one of the world's greatest comic book artists. So, let's see what they made, shall we? This is the origins of the Just Imagine universe Batman explored. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. A quick note on the Just Imagine series as a whole. Before we begin this feature, we're going to give you a little bit of background on this series and its general perception within the DC fandom. Because while Stan Lee creating the Justice League of America sounds amazing on paper, to some fans it remained just that. Many hardcore DC fans were disappointed that Lee took away many of the aspects that made their superheroes relatable to them. But in Stan's defense, that was kind of the point. When he was approached by DC for this series, they didn't ask him to do a bunch of Elseworld stories. They genuinely wanted their fans to, pardon the pun here, just imagine Stan creating the Justice League of America. Now, Marvel and DC are fundamentally different comic book companies based solely on the way they portray their heroes. Marvel, as we mentioned, focuses a lot more on naturalistic storytelling and minority representation than DC, at least in the past anyway. As a result, Stan Lee's casual style of writing didn't exactly fit the mold of some of the more serious DC characters, in particular the subject of this video. You'll see why in a minute too, but we wanted to give Stan a clean slate because at the end of the day, DC did ask him for his reimagining of their most iconic characters. And given that longtime Batman affiliate Michael Uslan oversaw the entire project's creation, we have to think that this really was just a fun exercise, as Stan puts it in his foreword to every issue of the Just Imagine series. With that in mind, let's take a look at what Stan Lee's Batman would have looked like. Wayne Williams, the origins of Stan Lee's African-American Batman. If there are two things Stan the Man loves, it's a hard-knock origin story for a character and alliterative character names. Luckily for Marvel maniacs, both are present in this issue of Just Imagine. Stan Lee with John Kubert creating Batman. From the very outset, we get the sense that this is going to be something entirely different from Bob Kane and Bill Finger's iconic creation. And that's not just because of the fact that Lee's Batman is African American. In Stan Lee's comic book formula, superheroes exist in the real world, and places like Metropolis and Gotham City do not exist. So, we're just guessing, and this is pure conjecture. This story begins in New York City, because that's where the best Stan Lee superheroes are from, and because some of the things his versions of Batman will end up doing will remind you of the Big Apple. Now that we've given you this entire context, let's jump into this story. The issue begins with cold, hard rain pouring over a dingy neighborhood. A mother-son duo is making their way home from a funeral. Stan writes that the night is cold, but Wayne Williams' heart is colder, for it beats with silent, seething rage. Wayne's father was a police officer. He served the force faithfully and was perfect when it came to doing his duty, but some vendettas can span beyond time served, and Wayne's father was gunned down in cold blood by some criminals he had previously put behind bars. We can see that Wayne is bitter about this entire ordeal. He blames not only the thugs who killed his father, but the police force as well for not saving him. His mother reminds him that his father died in the line of duty and that he shouldn't be bitter about it, but he simply replies by telling her, "I can't help it, Ma. I'm hurting." He spent his whole life trying to make a difference, and where did it get him? This ain't a neighborhood, it's a war zone. While his mother and we the readers were rather taken aback by this teenager's cynicism, we'd soon come to see that he wasn't entirely wrong to think that way. The pair passed by a bunch of hoodlums beating up a nobody who owed them money. Mrs. Williams immediately intervenes and tries to stop them from hurting him, but Wayne steps in and tells her to get out of there and that the guy probably deserves it because he recognized the man doing the beating, Hans Horgham, the local menace of their neighborhood. Hans recognizes that Wayne is the son that slimeball Sam Williams and asks if his mother's got a problem with his business, but they leave before the situation can escalate. When they get back home, Wayne's mom scolds him for siding with Hans, but he flat out tells her the reality of the situation, that she didn't know who she was messing with. Unfortunately for him, he was about to find out real soon. False allegations and incarcerations, Wayne Williams goes to jail. So, clearly, Wayne Williams is a kid that knows how the real world works and is working hard to steer clear of trouble, especially now that his father was 6 feet in the dirt and they had no one to watch their backs anymore. Wayne thought that by letting Hans Horgham, who really should have been called Hammer Hands, in our opinion, go about business as usual, he was doing the right thing. But the fact that his father was a cop and probably had, let's say, less than pleasant interactions with Hans in the past made Wayne a prime target for the lifelong con. Well, that and the fact that the kid made the mistake of putting his hands on Hans' girl. We're sorry if that last sentence confused you. See, Wayne worked a regular day job at a grocery store, and one fine day, who should happen to cross by the store but Mr. Hammer himself with his foxy girl wrapped around his arm. Wayne opines that Hans surely lives the big life, but his thoughts are interrupted by a drive-by attempt at Horgham's life. Hans managed to duck to safety because he knows that a man in his position needs to be alert at all times, though he does initially dismiss the threat when his partner brings it up. But she stands there in the middle of the streets, frozen with fear. Wayne Williams acts almost as if on its instinct and tackles her to the ground, saving her life, but Hans only cares about the fact that he lays his hands on his woman. Again, we swear we're not trying to come up with these hand puns. Horgham threatens Wayne by saying he'll get what his father got if he interfered in his business, and when the naive boy tries to attack him, he decides to show him why he's called Hans. If it hadn't been for his girlfriend, Wayne Williams would be more like Stephen Strange today, and he wouldn't need a car accident to get there either. The kid thinks to himself that with Dad gone and Hans threatening him, things couldn't get any worse, but he proved himself to be a poor prophet. For the very next day, Horgham and his hoodlums staged an armed robbery at the grocery store Wayne worked at, framed him as a co-conspirator, and then knocked him out so he would be the only person caught in the acts. Fans of Luke Cage are raising their eyebrows right now. We're not done yet. Of course, his case is brought to trial, and of course, he's convicted and thrown into prison. It wouldn't be much of a superhero origin story without a bit of injustice, would it? And what comes next is going to remind you of another legendary Marvel character, but bear with us because it will make sense by the end. A fighter for justice makes a lifelong friend in prison and also gains a pardon. Wayne Williams' prison stint was, let's just say, less than pleasant in the beginning. He got assigned to the sewing department of his facility, which was apparently seen as a weakness in prison, but you're going to be amazed by just how many superheroes could have been potential tailors for the Kingsmen by the time we're done, because despite it making him look like slim pickings, Wayne Williams picked up a trade that will become integral to his career later on. But anyway, things got so depressing for him in the can that to keep himself occupied, Wayne starts counting the bats in the night sky. He even managed to tame one and took it on as a constant companion from then onwards. Another thing that got him attention early on was an altercation with the prison bully Corgo, whom Wayne witnessed harassing an elderly inmate at the institution's equivalent of a weight room. Williams stepped in and got his butt summarily handed to him by Corgo in a short fashion. He ragdolls Wayne around the weight room and slams him against the wall, leaving the yard before the guards could show up. Another elderly inmate empathizes with Wayne's plight and tells him he shouldn't have interfered, but this incident, coupled with what happened with Hans's girl, has proven to Wayne one thing: he shoots off his mouth without thinking. To this, his fellow inmate replies, "A good impulse is often a sign of a good spirit," and advises the young man to use the prison's facilities to develop himself into something more formidable. He tells him he must train both body and mind, hit the barbells as much as the books, and become as self-reliant as he can if he wants to survive this situation and actually do some good in the world. The pair develops a friendship, and Wayne learns that the elderly inmate is Dr. Frederick Grant, a scientist and environmentalist who got caught sabotaging a machine that was polluting Mother Earth. In other words, he was like Wayne, and the pair developed a genuine bond over the next few weeks as Wayne Williams got super smart and super jacked, thanks to a couple of pointers from the inmates who liked the cojones on the new kid who stood up to Corgo. Wayne Williams learned that Dr. Grant was a physicist and an inventor, but before their relationship could develop further, Grant came up for parole and was released from prison. Little did Wayne Williams know that everything was downhill from there for him. A week after Grant's release, he received a letter that told him his mother had passed away, and it broke Wayne. In his grief, he blamed Hans Horgum for everything that had happened, and he made killing Hans his primary goal in life. He was itching to get his vengeance when something rather fortunate happened. Someone opened up every damn cell in the prison institution, and all the inmates naturally flocked to the warden's office to try and take him hostage. Only one man amongst them stood by the side of the law: Wayne Williams. He fought off Corgo and at least a dozen other muscle-bound inmates before prison security got this riotous situation under control. When the warden asked him why he, an inmate, would come to the aid of the law, Wayne simply thought to himself that the warden wouldn't understand, as we see an image of him and his mother standing over his father's grave, implying that he had embraced dispensing justice as a part of his personal identity. For his effort in subduing the prison riot, Wayne Williams was pardoned unequivocally. Now, back on the streets, he prepared his master plan for the ultimate revenge, and he got an old friend involved in it too. Superstar, vigilante, and pro wrestler extraordinaire, the birth of Batman. After getting out of prison, all Wayne thought about was survival and a way to kill Hans. He found a cheap lodging in a shady part of town with his pet bat and shaved his head bald to avoid being recognized by his enemies. Finally, having gotten some actual free time on his hands, Wayne got to thinking, how could he take down a criminal as powerful and influential as Hans Horgum? He had single-handedly destroyed the rival gang and taken over their territory, solidifying himself as the true king of crime. To defeat such a person, Wayne would need money, a lot of money. And as he thought about how he was going to get this money, he flipped on a TV set in his apartment. Fans of Spider-Man can already tell where this is going. As he was musing about what he could do to earn a ton of dough as quickly as possible, the TV channel switched to some good old Southern wrestling. And while Wayne thought nothing of it at first, but he started giving it more thought when he heard the promoter scream out the prize money. He put two and two together and got to sewing, using his pet companion as the inspiration for his gimmick. And sure enough, a couple days later, the Batman was born a masked wrestler whose entire shtick was that he was unbeatable, even in a shoot fight. While Spider-Man took on wrestling as kind of like an experiment, Wayne Williams threw himself into the business and quickly became one of the biggest global stars in professional wrestling. We're talking El Santo in Mexico, Jushin Thunder Liger in Japan, and Bret Hart in Canada levels of fame. The money just kept pouring in after that, and soon enough, the Batman was on every billboard, on every cereal box, and on every major talk show that American television could provide. Wayne Williams earned so much money that he built himself a mansion in Los Angeles and turned it into a permanent base of operations against Hans Horgum. He located Frederick Grant and revealed his secret identity to him to gain his trust, and basically made him an offer he couldn't refuse. He'd built a lab at his mansion that would allow Frederick to come up with all the tech that Batman would need to be a crime-fighting vigilante. On the way to his mansion, Wayne tells Grant about his history and says that he will crush the vermin who preys on helpless people, and for that, he needs Grant's help. Oh, and he did mention that they'll pretend Grant owns the mansion and that he'll be posing as his bodyguard. Can't get a real estate deal better than this one in Los Angeles, we'll tell you that much. Anyway, the doctor gets to work and enhances Wayne Williams' suit to match the lifestyle he was hoping to lead. Night vision goggles, enhanced hearing aids, Kevlar, gliding wings, you get the idea. And so, with his suit and his Batcopter conventionally built for him off panel, Batman leaps into the night sky to confront the man who killed both his parents, at least in his mind, anyway. The death of a menace and the birth of a hero. Batman goes from wrestler to superhero. Wayne Williams leaps onto the balcony of Hans Horgham's fine estate and confronts him, asking him if he has a few minutes. In typical Stan Lee fashion, all of Hammerhand's cronies are scared to get into a fight with him. After all, Batman is an undefeated wrestler. One of them even says, "I saw him wrestle, boss. Maybe we ought to go easy on him." To which Hans replies, "I don't go easy on anybody. No two-bit wrestler can scare Hans Horgham," and proceeds to punch a chunk out of a wall. Batman evades it easily and tells Hans he's got news for him, that he isn't the same teenager anymore. This confuses Hans because he doesn't know that it's actually Wayne Williams underneath the cowl. This momentary shift in focus turns the tide in Batman's favor, and he's able to gain the upper hand in the fight, especially after his padded hair gear withstands a lethal blow from Horgham, deflating his ego and boosting Wayne's confidence. Hans corners Wayne on the same balcony he landed on and charges head first at him, but he uses his wrestling skills to simply leg lift Hans Horgham a few feet into the air and lets him plummet to his death as revenge for the pain he inflicted upon his family and countless others. In the epilogue of the issue, we see a newspaper page with the headline "Batman Strikes," making its way through a litany of people, old and young, cop and citizen, male and female. It ends up with a couple of children on monkey bars where one of them wears the image of the front cover over his face, signifying the birth of superheroes in this world. From this point onward, Batman gets embroiled in a major conspiracy being orchestrated by the mysterious Reverend Dominic Dark, whose Church of Eternal Empowerment makes a brief but ominous appearance in this issue. Dark sets his best disciple, Robin, out to kill Batman because he believes that the latter's presence will mess with his plans of bringing forth a crisis. As it turns out, Robin was brainwashed into joining Dark's church, and Batman's truth serum gets his mind straight. The dynamic duo pair up for a one-off encounter against Dark's henchmen at the church itself, but they managed to portal away. Later, Batman is one of the 4 heroes that the mystical Green Lantern contacts in an attempt to stop Dark from bringing forth some dreaded entity, leading to the formation of the Justice League of America, which officially exists on Earth 6 in the post-Flashpoint DC continuity.
I think DC Comics is a company that publishes superhero comic books.
Marvelous verdict. The very idea of Stan Lee writing a Batman story seems alien, doesn't it? So the fact that it exists is something we as comic book fans should treasure. Sure, there are a lot of things that he doesn't quite stick the landing on with his version of Batman. We'd have loved to have seen a resolution to the moral question Nita posed to Batman towards the end of the issue, where she tells him however evil Hans might have been, it didn't give Batman the right to kill. Wayne Williams tried to explain to himself, but just sorts of murmurs it away and then thinks to himself that he'll clandestinely hire her as Frederick's secretary to keep her close to him. But as a standalone story and the historic anomaly that its existence, we can't help but just love the idea of Stan Lee with Joe Kubert creating Batman. These two pioneers of the comic book industry came together to tell a story that was partly serious, partly ridiculous, and all throughout entertaining. And if that isn't the goal of reading a comic book, we don't know what else is.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.